For those of you who have not used Zotero groups before, this is an open group where you can add anything you like, really. Articles, books, images from Flickr, videos from YouTube. You do have to have a Zotero account in order to join the group. If you go to zotero.org/groups/perils_of_openness, log in with your Zotero account if you have one. You can then add things to this group. If you don't have a Zotero account or don't want to have a Zotero account, I'm hoping that you might Twitter things that you've come across. And I'm looking here, despite the name of the group, for both examples of reasons to be afraid of open content on the web, open higher education content on the web, and reasons not to be afraid, but perhaps especially the former. And I intend to populate this group myself. I have a number of sources for it already, but I thought I would try an experiment and see whether we could, in fact, get some content into this by the end of the academy, if not by the end of the presentation. So if you want to, please participate in that. With that, I'm going to talk about higher education content on the open web. Some of the things that are incredibly awesome about that, and some of the things that maybe we should be legitimately afraid of. And I'm going to start by talking about that camp because that's part of what I do. For those of you who don't know, that camp is an unconference, which means that there are no pre-scheduled papers. We all create the schedule on the first day of the conference. Everybody meets in a room and creates the schedule themselves in a process that I can talk ad infinitum about. But it's a very improvisational process. And one of the other key, so that's one of the key characteristics of that camp. But one of the other characteristics of that camp is that it is free and open. It's open on the web. There's a great deal of blogging that goes on for that camp, and there's a great deal of Twittering that goes on with that camp. We have a That Camp hashtag that sort of continually has conversation happening on it. Whenever there's a That Camp happening, usually people use the Twitter account to report very, sometimes at great length, on what is happening in that session. And I think that, you know, I don't want to concentrate exclusively on that camp. Probably many of you know that if you go to conferences these days, often particularly that use of Twitter, sometimes you know the live blogging, that sort of thing, it's a really new thing that's happening at academic conferences. That academic conferences are now, even when they're not recorded in any way, they can be reported on by people who are present so that the conversation spreads beyond the room itself. This doesn't happen at every academic conference. Some of them are still not really on the Twitter bandwagon. But certainly at that camp, you know, we've tried to make everything that happens there documented on the blog, documented on Twitter, reported that way. Now I find it really interesting. And again, I mean, the positives of this are, I think, difficult to overstate. Anyone who, every once in a while now, I go to a conference where people have never used Twitter before or seen it used in this fashion. And their astonishment at the kind of, you know, the fact that there's a conversation going on with people who aren't at the conference is always sort of delightful to see because it's so old to me now. Oh, this has been happening since 2009, you know, this Twitter back channel. I'm so used to it. You know, and I'm very accustomed to people, as was happening on the UMW FA11 hashtag. I'm very accustomed to people joining in the conversation, having things to say, and I think that's wonderful and amazing. Similarly with that camp, we certainly don't do an official conference proceedings, partly because there are no pre-scheduled, pre-done presentations, but we do, you know, as you can see here, try to take notes on the sessions. Now, again, this is the site for Great Lakes, that camp, which just happened at the end of April, 1st of May. And there were 2 sessions there that actually led into this thinking, just the start of this shift in what I'm thinking, just my desire to talk about the fears, the problems with having higher education be online. One of those sessions, I'm probably going to have to search here, was called Evangelism. I spelled it wrong. Evangelism, which was a term we came up with on the morning. And it was a fantastic session, and there's a terrific Google Doc here that reports what went on in the session. And I had somebody particularly on Twitter was asking specifically for notes from that session. When we were reporting on it, somebody was saying, I really need to know this. I need to know how to talk to people about technology who are not interested in using technology. And this was a particularly great session because we talked about why do you want to evangelize? What do you want to evangelize? What do you not want to evangelize? And we came up with, I think, a very good, very informally published document of what went on. However, in the course of this, certainly it was a very useful conversation about the problems with evangelism as well. Even that term seems to suggest a sort of, uncritical, unthinking, you must use technology, it's a good thing to use technology. So, and so that discussion began there. And we began we began by talking about, okay, what do we want to evangelize? We didn't list here what we don't want to evangelize, but it did come up in the session that one of the things we didn't want to evangelize was distance learning, essentially, online-only courses that are cookie-cutter, that are, sold to Middle Eastern students, that kind of thing. Certain kinds of online learning, right? I mean, the kind of online learning that we don't like. We're like, well, we don't want to evangelize that. We don't like that. And it was surprising to me a little bit how rarely this kind of thing comes up. But in the course of conversations like that, this seed of doubt began in my mind about this project of always being positive about technology. To which groups are you always positive? And it also became clear that in the session itself, there were certain things that were being twittered and certain things that were not being twittered. And I don't know if I can even get any more specific than that. It's not that we were saying anything particularly horrible, but it's surprising to me. I think if you did semantic analysis on a lot of that camp Twitter streams or a lot of that camp reporting, you would find that they are overwhelmingly positive. And that is partly because that camp is an overwhelmingly positive experience most of the time. But there was a second session at Great Lakes that camp that was not heavily twittered. In fact, I don't even think that there's people were twittering about it. And by the way, here is Digital Evangelism, the not animated GIF, but the movie poster. We had our own sort of little storytelling contingent there. But you can see this as a slightly satiric poster. We were a little concerned about this notion of digital evangelism, but it was this moment where we began to see ourselves as perhaps being a little too positive, perhaps not really legitimately exploring some of the problems. So what we did was we had a spontaneous session, which is unnotated, which was, I don't remember the title, but it was something about ethics in the digital humanities. And in fact, we began that session, I was sort of co-facilitating it with someone else. I began that session, as I almost never do, by saying, I think we should probably not Twitter this session too much. Because I was like, this is a session where I want to be negative. I will not say, I will tell you what happened in that session, and you are free to Twitter it now if you like. And I think people did report what went on in that room a little bit. And none of it was, again, particularly ground-shattering, but some of what we were talking about was things like, all right, in the digital humanities, are we, by our emphasis on the extremely positive uses that technology can be put to, is that emphasis contributing to contingent labor problems in the academy? Technology costs a lot of money. Is that money that should be better spent on hiring good teachers? And we all kind of, sighed. And that's about it, Similarly, we were talking about carbon footprint, the carbon footprint of technology. Do we talk about that enough when we talk about teaching with technology in higher education? Do we talk about that enough when we are slightly utopian, as we can tend to be, about this brave new world of new media? Do we emphasize that enough? We did actually also have somebody there who was doing online-only classes, which sounded kind of terrible. The online-only classes can be done. They take a lot of time. They take a lot of money to prepare well. They hadn't given her that time. She really was being adjunct labor and asked to teach, because it's more efficient. Well, if it's a room, you can only have 30 people in the room. If it's online only, you can have 50 students and pay the instructor the same amount of money, right? This kind of thing. And I don't know that we came out with anything particularly tremendous from that session, but it was good to air those issues. And they're issues that don't always get aired at something like that camp, where the emphasis is overwhelmingly on what can we do with technology. What can we do with technology to make higher education better? It was great, at least, just to kind of express the notions that there could be things that are wrong with this. We didn't do anything anything as positive as moving towards solutions during these things. But one thing we did realize was that often we get to talk about these issues when we're teaching. When those of us who do teach are often, will bring up these issues to our students. When you're teaching about technology, Jeff is teaching a history of, the information age class, and he's going to bring up I'm sure, a great many things that are problematic about technology. Our emphasis on technology as a savior to all kinds of social ills, all sorts of things. But that's a rhetoric that sometimes doesn't come into play when you're talking to colleagues who are using traditional methods and don't seem to want to get beyond those, right? So that was an interesting moment to realize that we may be encouraging our students to think critically, but not our colleagues, especially not colleagues that are not already on the technology bandwagon, not already on the new media bandwagon. And then, final realization from this was that after the session had ended, I really questioned my decision to say maybe this is stuff that shouldn't be Twittered. Because, again, it was, all right, why do I think that the public discourse has to be positive? Why do I think that? What is wrong with me? And so, particularly as an academic. And so, this is my slight attempt to remedy that, and I may be writing some more about this. And at least in this presentation, I want to be a little bit even-handed, And so, more generally, just not about that camp itself, but about academic conferences. It's very, very much the case that anything that happens in any kind of meeting, whether it's an academic disciplinary conference or whether it's something that's more about administering the university, can go public immediately. I think the default even is often public. If people have a phone, they can take a picture, they can report on something, it can go public immediately. And what I do wonder sometimes is, okay, are we being careful enough to create safe spaces for difficult conversations? Okay. The final thing I'll say about that camp, which again is awesome, and I encourage you to have one and/or go to one, is that that camp is free and open. We've had difficulties, not large difficulties at all, but slight difficulties keeping it free and open. Free and open on the web is the subject of this talk, and that camp has, from the beginning, we've said,